My name is Maya Carter, and right now I'm standing on the edge of the stage, staring into a crowd of hundreds, knowing that in the next 60 seconds, I'm about to burn the illusion my family built for years. The lights are blinding. The air is thick. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like war drums. Somewhere in the front row, my parents are smiling, still smug in their ignorance, still convinced this day is all about my sister. They don't know the speech they're about to hear. They don't know I was chosen to deliver it. And they have no idea how much I've bled just to stand here. But they're about to find out. And I won't blink when it happens. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. They always said I was the strong one, the independent one, the one who didn't need anything. Funny how being denied everything makes you look strong. Growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. White porch swing, neat lawn, matching Christmas sweaters. My dad, Gerald Carter, was a numbers man, an accountant who measured success in returns and risk. My mom, Linda, taught English at the local high school. She loved Shakespeare and quoting Maya Angelou, but never quite knew how to talk to her own daughters. Then there was my sister, Savannah, 2 years younger, but always treated like the golden child. She had honey blonde curls, a dazzling smile, and a voice that could charm pastors and politicians alike. Savannah was their hope, their pride. I was the quiet achiever, the one who made honor roll without a party, who won awards without cake. I stopped expecting fairness around the age of 10. Christmas mornings? She got an iPad. I got off-brand sneakers. Science fair? They took a week off work to help her build a mini Mars rover. My art exhibit? Mum stopped by for 15 minutes on her lunch break and said, "You really should focus more on real subjects." Real. That's a word they used a lot with me. Get real, Maya. Be realistic. That business stuff isn't a real plan. But I had a plan, even when no one asked what it was. The only person who ever believed in me was Grandma Ruby. Every summer, I'd escape to her little brick house just outside of Asheville. She'd sit beside me on her front porch while I sketched ideas in my notebook. Restaurant concepts, boutique marketing strategies, even a dog walking service. "You see the world different, Maya," she'd say, sipping sweet tea. "That's not a flaw, baby. That's vision." That vision got me through high school. I joined the Business Leaders of Tomorrow Club, ran fundraisers, placed first in a statewide entrepreneurship contest. I worked 20 hours a week at a bakery to save for college, all while keeping a 4.0 GPA. My economics teacher, Mr. Doyle, once said I was the most determined student he'd ever taught. But at home, it was still Savannah this, Savannah that. Debate team victories, cheer captain, homecoming queen. Her every triumph was celebrated like a national holiday. The real heartbreak came senior year. Savannah and I both got accepted into the University of North Carolina. Same graduating class, even though she had skipped a grade. I got into the business program, full acceptance. She got into political science. We opened our acceptance letters on the same day. I still remember how my voice shook as I held my envelope at the dinner table. "I got in," I said, heart pounding. "UNC business program." Dad didn't look up from his phone. That's nice. 5 minutes later, Savannah burst in screaming with joy. "I'm going to UNC." They jumped out of their seats. Dad opened a bottle of sparkling cider. Mom cried. And just like that, my achievement disappeared. 2 weeks later, we sat down for what would become the most painful dinner of my life. "We've been saving for college since Savannah was born," Dad said, eyes never once meeting mine. "We're covering her tuition entirely." I waited. "And for me?" I asked quietly. Awkward silence. Then Mom said, "Maya, you're resourceful. You'll figure it out. Community college isn't a bad option." Dad added, "We have to invest where it counts. Savannah has the drive, the leadership potential. This is her future." "She deserves it," Mom said, placing her hand on mine. "You'll be okay." But what she meant was, she deserved it. You didn't. I felt something break inside me that night. Not just disappointment, not just anger. Something deeper. A bone-deep truth I'd always suspected had just been confirmed. I wasn't worth the investment. That night, I packed a bag and drove 2 hours to Grandma Ruby's. I didn't tell them I was coming. When I showed up at her doorstep, crying and shaking, she didn't ask why. She just opened her arms. After I told her everything, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Maya, you can let this destroy you, or you can let it define you." I didn't sleep that night, but I made a decision. I would go to UNC. I would pay my own way. And I would outshine them all. Because I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to rise. Christmas morning always had a script at our house. Savannah would leap down the stairs first, her curls bouncing like she was starring in a Hallmark movie. I followed quietly, usually with socks on my hands to keep them warm because our parents never turned the heat up until after 9 a.m. Dad would hand Savannah the biggest, flashiest box with gold wrapping paper, and Mom would already have her camera out, recording Savannah's squeals as she unwrapped the latest gadget or designer perfume set. My gifts came next, smaller, simpler. One year it was a second-hand sweater. Another year, a planner that still had last year's calendar. "You've always been the practical one," Mom said when I tried not to look disappointed. Savannah needs the encouragement, especially now with college coming. That year, she got a new MacBook. I got a Walmart gift card. Encouragement. That word haunted me. It was like they were nurturing her dreams while trimming mine down to something more reasonable. By spring, Savannah had her own college counselor, tutors for her AP classes, and weekend visits to UNC with Mom and Dad. They even paid for her to attend a political debate summer camp in DC. Meanwhile, I was working 5 days a week at Bee's Bake Shop, folding cake boxes and memorizing prices. I studied during my lunch breaks, at the bus stop, sometimes even in the walk-in fridge to escape the noise of the kitchen. I'd saved every dollar, every single tip. My plan wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I'd live off campus, take the bus, apply for every scholarship under the sun. Savannah didn't have to worry about any of that. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find Mom helping her pick out new bedding and fairy lights for her dorm. "I want it to feel cozy," Savannah said, sipping from a latte Dad had bought her earlier that day. "College should feel like home, you know?" I didn't say anything. My home would be a shared apartment in a neighborhood known more for its cheap rent than safety. When I mentioned needing a ride to a campus orientation session, Dad blinked. "You didn't sign up with Savannah?" "We're in different programs," I reminded him. "I got into business. She's in political science." "Oh, right. Well, I'm already driving her. Maybe you can find a bus?" I nodded. I was used to finding my own way. That summer, Savannah threw a going-away party. The entire house was decorated with blue and white balloons, UNC banners, and trays of catered food. All her friends were there, teachers, neighbors, even her middle school debate coach. They toasted to her bright future and unlimited potential. I stood near the back, holding a paper plate with half-eaten pasta salad, wondering if anyone even remembered I was leaving for the same university. 2 weeks later, the family SUV was packed to the brim. Suitcases, new bedding, dorm decor, a mini fridge. Dad triple-checked the tire pressure. Mom had a cooler full of snacks. They took pictures in front of the house. I watched from the porch with my own luggage. 2 second-hand suitcases, a box of textbooks I'd bought used online, and my backpack. I'd be driving my beat-up Honda, the one with a check engine light that refused to go off. No photos, no cooler, just me and the road. As they pulled out of the driveway, Savannah waved out the window. "See you on campus, sis," I waved back. She looked excited. I felt scared, but determined. My apartment was exactly what I could afford. Tiny, dim, and noisy. I shared it with 3 other girls I met through a housing forum. One of them, Jade, greeted me with a smile and a half-assembled IKEA desk. "Your room's the one with the busted blinds," she said. "Hope you're not too picky." "I'm not," I replied, dropping my bags. "Trust me." I spent that first night staring at the ceiling, listening to sirens and car horns outside. I could hear my roommate in the next room watching reality TV. It was a far cry from the decorated dorm Savannah posted about on Instagram, complete with string lights and campus views. But it was mine. Orientation week was a blur of introductions, forms, and walking until my feet blistered. I found the student employment office, the financial aid office, and every single coffee shop within walking distance. I applied to all of them. I got a job at Perk and Pour, the busiest cafe near campus. They hired me on the spot when I mentioned I had barista experience. I also picked up weekend shifts at a local bookstore that paid slightly more than minimum wage. My schedule became a delicate balancing act. 5 a.m. wake-ups, coffee shop shifts, classes, bookstore shifts, study sessions, then homework until 2 a.m. I skipped meals sometimes, not because I forgot, but because food was another number in my spreadsheet. Meanwhile, Savannah's stories trickled into my texts. "Sorority rush is intense, lol," she wrote one night. "But I think I found my people," I replied. "Glad you're settling in." She never asked how I was doing. I didn't tell her. What was the point? But something shifted in those first few weeks. In my business ethics class, I actually understood the material better than most. Concepts like opportunity cost, resource allocation, and market positioning made sense, because I was living them every day. When Professor Ramirez read my first paper, he paused at my desk after class. "You ever thought about entrepreneurship?" he asked. I blinked. "Actually, yeah, I have." He smiled. "Well, you've got the brain for it, and the grit." I held on to those words like currency. Back at my apartment, Jade noticed my late nights and started leaving small notes. "Leftover pasta in the fridge if you're hungry." Or, "You've got this. Don't forget to breathe." One night, I came home to find a bowl of soup waiting for me. "You looked like a zombie yesterday," Jade said from the couch. "Figured you could use something warm." I sat beside her, too tired to cry. "You don't talk much about your family," she added. "There's not much to say," I whispered. She nudged me. "Well, you've got us now. And this couch. And that soup. Not much, but it's something." It was everything. In my darkest hours, I remembered Grandma Ruby's words. "You're not meant to follow their path. You're meant to build your own." And brick by brick, shift by shift, I was building it, even if no one else saw it yet. Next chapter, Maya finds a surprising mentor and begins to turn her hardship into her first real opportunity. I didn't pack in anger. I packed in silence. That kind of deep, breathless silence you feel when something inside you has finally broken. Not loudly, but permanently. I folded my shirts into a second-hand duffel bag, counted the small envelope of cash I'd saved from bakery tips, and zipped it shut without a word. My parents were still downstairs, probably discussing Savannah's orientation schedule, or where to hang her UNC pennant in the living room. I left the house without saying goodbye. The 2-hour drive to Grandma Ruby's felt longer than it ever had. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. My chest felt tight the entire way. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just played the same song on repeat, an old soul track Grandma used to hum while doing dishes, because somehow that grounded me. When I arrived, it was already dark. The porch light was on, casting a soft yellow glow on her red brick steps like it always did. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd been waiting. "Baby girl," she said softly. No questions, no judgment, just arms open wide and the smell of lavender and lemon tea. I crumbled. I told her everything. How I got accepted to UNC, how Savannah did too, how our parents opened champagne for her and barely looked at me, how they said she deserved it and I didn't, how they told me to take out loans and figure it out while fully funding Savannah's future. Grandma Ruby didn't say much at first. She just rubbed my back in small circles and listened. When I was finally quiet, she looked me straight in the eyes. "Let me tell you something important, Maya," she said. "Sometimes the people who should see your light are too blinded by their own expectations to notice it. That doesn't make your light any less bright. It just means you've got to shine it for yourself." I stayed with her that weekend, slept in the room I used to stay in during summers, the one with the old quilt and creaky ceiling fan. Every morning she made coffee and bacon, and every night she reminded me that I had always been enough, even when my parents failed to see it. By Monday, I had made my decision. I was going to UNC. I didn't have a safety net, no financial backup. But I had something stronger: resolve. I drove back home early, quietly slipped into my room, and began working out the math. Tuition, housing, textbooks, food. I made a spreadsheet, then a backup spreadsheet, then one in case I needed to live off ramen for 3 months. I applied for every scholarship I could find, need-based, merit-based, even one from a local quilting club that awarded $500 to women pursuing unconventional business dreams. I wrote more essays in 2 weeks than I had my entire senior year. I asked teachers for recommendation letters, spent hours in the school library researching financial aid, and met with my guidance counselor, Ms. Porter, twice a week. "You're doing everything right," she told me. "Most students would have broken down by now. You're fighting harder than anyone I've ever seen." Still, every night when I lay in bed, I wondered, what if it's not enough? What if I have to drop out after one semester? I kept working at B's Bake Shop, taking every shift I could. Sometimes I pulled doubles and came home smelling like sugar and bleach. I stopped hanging out with friends, stopped responding to group chats. I didn't have time for pity parties or people who pitied me. Meanwhile, Savannah was hosting a college send-off party. Balloons, cake, photos. She posted a video tour of her dorm essentials: color-coded drawers, string lights, monogrammed towels, my essentials, a used backpack, a chipped coffee mug from the thrift store, and a folder labeled loan documents. 2 weeks before move-in, I received an email. I'd been awarded a small local scholarship, $1,000. It wasn't much in the grand scheme, but I burst into tears anyway. It meant someone believed in me. That same week, Grandma Ruby called me. "Check your mailbox," she said, and then hung up. Inside was a check. Not enough to cover tuition or even books, but a small gift from her Social Security savings. I called to protest. She said, "Don't argue with an old woman who wants to bet on her granddaughter." With the scholarships, federal loans, and Grandma's check, I had enough to cover my first semester. Barely. I found a Facebook group for off-campus housing and posted that I was looking for roommates. 3 days later, I was added to a group chat with 3 other girls, strangers, but affordable strangers. We signed the lease digitally. I bought furniture secondhand off Craigslist, packed my life into 2 duffels and a milk crate of books, and labeled each box with a number instead of a name. The night before move-in, Mom stopped by my room. She looked awkward, holding a set of old sheets in one hand and a stack of notebooks in the other. "I thought you might need these," she said. I stared at the faded floral sheets, the same ones I used when I was 10. "Thanks," I said, though it didn't feel like gratitude. "Be careful out there," she added. "College isn't easy." I smiled faintly. "I've noticed." The next morning, they loaded Savannah's things into the SUV, matching luggage, decorative pillows, a new laptop. Dad triple-checked her tire pressure. Mom made breakfast and packed snacks. They posed for a family photo before driving off to UNC. No one offered to help me move. I drove myself in my old Civic, the one with the cracked windshield and the glove compartment that wouldn't close. I stopped for gas halfway through, sat in the parking lot, and stared at the GPS. My chest tightened. I wasn't scared of failing. I was scared of being invisible. Again. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the dingy apartment building, I looked up at the windows and took a deep breath. This wasn't what I had pictured. It wasn't what I deserved. But it was mine, and I would turn it into something no one could ignore. I moved into the apartment with 2 duffel bags, 1 milk crate of books, and a head full of plans. The place was even worse than the photos. Stained carpet, chipped paint, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of mildew and burnt cheese. My room was barely big enough to fit the twin mattress I'd bought secondhand, and a tiny desk I found on the curb 2 blocks over. The blinds were broken, and the window rattled when trucks passed on the main road. But it was mine. It was paid for with my own name on the lease, and no one could take that from me. My roommates were a strange mix. Danny was loud and lived on instant noodles and energy drinks. Amber was a biology major who talked about dissecting frogs at dinner. And then there was Jade, quiet, observant, and kind in a way that didn't ask anything in return. She kept to herself mostly, but we had a mutual understanding from the start. We were both here to survive, not to perform. Classes started on a Monday, and by Friday I already felt like I was drowning. My mornings began at 4:45 a.m., so I could walk to Perk and Paw, the campus coffee shop, and open by 5:30. The manager liked me because I was early, fast, and didn't complain when customers snapped or spelled my name wrong on orders. I worked until 9 a.m., peeled off my apron in the back room, then ran to class with my backpack bouncing behind me. After lectures, I headed straight to the used bookstore 2 blocks from campus, where I worked the afternoon shift shelving textbooks and organizing author readings. I usually got home around 10 p.m., scarfed down whatever leftovers I could afford, studied until midnight, and crashed for 4 hours before doing it all again. Sleep became optional. Food became strategic. I calculated every bite, every dollar. Ramen was 30 cents a pack. Bananas were 4 for $1. Some weeks I skipped shampoo so I could buy printer paper. I learned which campus buildings had free snacks during club meetings and timed my walks to accidentally arrive just as they were wrapping up. I got good at pretending I belonged. Meanwhile, Savannah texted occasionally. "We just did a paint night at the sorority house. Wish you were here." I stared at the photos she sent, matching pajamas, fairy lights, girls holding wine glasses like they were born to clink. I never replied. What was there to say? I was hand-washing laundry in the sink because the washer downstairs cost $2.50. Still, something happened that I didn't expect. I was thriving academically. In my business classes, I wasn't just keeping up. I was leading. Budgeting, forecasting, resource management. They weren't theories to me. They were my daily reality. When Professor Bennett asked us to design a mock startup proposal, I built one from scratch based on a real idea I'd been sketching for months, a digital support service for small businesses. I presented it like my rent depended on it, because in a way it did. After class, she stopped me. "Maya, where did you learn to think like that?" I shrugged. "Just life." She smiled. "Keep going. You've got something most students don't, perspective." That same week, I came home to find a sticky note on my bedroom door. It was from Jade. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge. Help yourself." I hadn't told her I skipped lunch that day. I hadn't told anyone. But she knew. From that point on, she'd leave meals sometimes. Nothing fancy, rice and beans, chicken soup, grilled cheese. But it kept me going. "You can pay me back by helping me study for chem," she'd say. "I suck at anything with numbers." She became my first real friend in college. The kind who didn't ask for explanations, who didn't flinch at silence, who let me be exactly as tired and real as I was. When she found out I worked 2 jobs, she blinked and said, "You're either superhuman or insane." I laughed. A little of both. But even with her support, there were days I wanted to give up. Like when my paycheck came in short because of a holiday closure. Or when I couldn't afford the $80 textbook and had to piece together readings from 3 library copies. One Thursday, I was so exhausted I fell asleep standing in the bookstore break room. My manager found me leaning against a mop handle and gave me the weekend off. I spent it curled up in bed, my body refusing to move. Then things got worse. In October, Perk and Paw reduced hours due to declining foot traffic. I lost 8 hours a week, nearly $300 a month. I sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at my budget spreadsheet, and for the first time, I couldn't make the numbers work. Rent, utilities, food, gas, books. It didn't add up. No matter how I sliced it, something was going to break. I scheduled a meeting with Ms. Benton at the financial aid office. I told her everything, my 2 jobs, my course load, my declining bank balance. She nodded slowly, then opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "Your GPA and professor recommendations qualify you for an emergency assistance grant," she said. "And Professor Bennett has referred you for a paid research assistant position. It pays more than either of your current jobs and offers more flexible hours." I nearly cried. I didn't. But I wanted to. The grant came through 2 days later. It wasn't much, but it bought me time. I interviewed with Professor Bennett that week, and by Monday I was assisting her with a study on small business resilience. It paid better, fit around my classes, and gave me something I hadn't felt since arriving. Hope. That job changed everything. It wasn't just money, it was validation. It reminded me I wasn't just here to survive. I had ideas, value, a voice worth listening to. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe I could do more than make it through. I could actually build something of my own, not in spite of my struggle, but because of it. By the middle of October, my body had adapted to the routine, barely. I still woke up every morning with the same kind of fatigue people usually associate with long-term grief, except mine wasn't from losing someone. It was from constantly losing time. I scheduled every hour of my day like my life depended on it, because it kind of did. But there was one new element in my life that didn't feel like a burden: the research assistant job with Professor Bennett. She was sharp, decisive, and never once looked at me like I was a charity case. In fact, I think she respected me more for how I operated: efficient, no nonsense, thorough. I helped her compile surveys, sort data, and analyze trends for her study on how small businesses in rural communities adapt to economic shifts. We were looking at real stories: family diners that stayed afloat by shifting to mobile orders, or corner stores that created delivery services during the pandemic. These weren't theories. They were lives, scraped together by necessity and grit, and I saw myself in every one of them. One Friday afternoon, as I was organizing data points in a spreadsheet, she looked up from her notes and said, "You ever thought about starting something of your own?" I blinked. "Actually, yeah. I used to sketch out business ideas as a kid. Thought it was just a phase." She smiled. "Doesn't sound like a phase to me." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of stress, but because of fire. I dug into my closet, pulled out an old sketchbook I'd brought from home, and flipped through the pages. Logos, app mock-ups, service packages. I'd once drawn up a whole plan for a digital assistant agency tailored for small businesses with limited tech access. I'd forgotten how serious I'd been about it, how real it had felt back then. Now, armed with actual business classes, real-world experience, and an insane amount of budgeting skill, it didn't feel like a childhood fantasy anymore. It felt like something I could build. I stayed up until 3 a.m., mapping out a basic version of the idea. I called it Nimble Desk. Nothing flashy, just simple, streamlined support for businesses that needed help with admin, marketing, scheduling, and digital presence, but didn't have the time or knowledge to do it alone. I listed potential service tiers, tools I'd need, how I could market it. My hands trembled while I typed, not from fear, but from purpose. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even Jade. Instead, I built in secret. On weekends, I watched tutorials on basic web development. I created a logo using free Canva templates. I opened a separate Google account, registered a basic domain name, and started designing service packages. At first, it was just a landing page and a form, but it existed. It was real. Then I took a leap. I emailed a bakery I'd written about during Professor Bennett's research, one struggling to keep up with customer requests on Facebook. I offered to streamline their orders and help automate their social posts. I quoted them $75 for a week's worth of digital support. They said yes. The moment I got that Venmo payment notification, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a student working jobs anymore. I was a business owner, a service provider, someone who had turned nothing into something. I reinvested that first payment into better tools, a scheduling app, a logo design upgrade, and a proper business email. By the end of October, I had 4 clients, small but steady: a florist, a bookshop, and 2 local eateries. I worked from my laptop between classes, on breaks, at the coffee shop when the line was slow. Every dollar I made went toward groceries, gas, and paying down the smallest of my private loans. My budget spreadsheet finally had something new in the income column. But the best part? It was mine. No boss, no time clock, no parents. Just me and the work I'd built. Jade noticed the shift in me. "You look lighter," she said one night as we were folding laundry. "Still tired as hell, but less haunted." I smiled. "I'm building something." "Like, with your hands?" "Number with my head." She didn't ask for details, just nodded and said, "Good. You deserve to feel like your work is going somewhere." Then, something unexpected happened. Savannah called. I saw her name flash across my phone screen while I was walking back from the library, arms full of textbooks. My thumb hovered over the red button. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Not since she moved into her gleaming dorm room and waved me off with that bright, blissfully oblivious smile. I answered anyway. "Hey," she said, like we talked every day. "Got a sec?" Kind of walking in the dark, carrying 10 pounds of microeconomics, but sure. She chuckled, but there was a nervous edge in her voice. "Can I ask you something kind of serious?" That made me stop walking. Okay. My roommate just bailed on our group presentation. I need help with the stats part. I suck at numbers. I waited. I thought maybe you'd be the best person to ask, she said, sounding smaller than usual. I swallowed my first instinct to ask why she hadn't called before this, why she only reached out when she needed something. But I didn't. Not because I didn't still feel it, but because I'd changed. I didn't need her validation anymore. Send me the file, I said. I'll take a look tonight. Really? Thank you, Maya. Seriously, I owe you. No, I said, you don't. After we hung up, I stood under a street lamp for a moment, thinking about how different we still were. Savannah had a safety net. I had a tightrope. But that night, as I walked back to the apartment with my arms aching and a dozen unread emails from clients, I realized something. I didn't want her life anymore. I was building my own. I didn't see it coming. 1 minute, I was replying to client emails on my lunch break, halfway through a cold turkey sandwich, and the next, my manager at the bookstore pulled me aside with that tight-lipped expression I'd come to associate with bad news. Maya, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. We're cutting weekend hours across the board starting next week. Seasonal drop in traffic. I blinked. So, how many hours am I losing? 8, maybe more if we stay slow. 8 hours. 8 hours at $13.25 an hour, before taxes. That was over $400 a month. My rent money. My grocery budget. My safety net, if you could even call it that. I nodded like it didn't gut me, thanked him like it was a favor, and walked back to the front of the store in a daze. That night, I sat at the chipped kitchen table in our apartment, staring at my spreadsheet with numb fingers. The math didn't work anymore. Rent was due in 2 weeks. My perk and pour income was barely enough for gas and groceries, and my business, though growing, wasn't stable enough to count on. I could already feel the anxiety rising in my chest like a wave about to crest. Jade came home around 10, tossed her bag on the couch, and immediately noticed something was off. What happened? Bookstore cut my hours. She dropped into the chair across from me, pulled her hoodie tighter around her and said, "Okay, talk to me. What's the shortfall?" I told her. Every dollar, every gap. She didn't flinch, just listened. Then she said something that shocked me. "Have you talked to Ms. Benton again?" I shook my head. I already got the emergency grant. They're probably tapped out. So ask anyway. You're not just another student. Your GPA's fire, you're working, and you've started your own business. That counts for something. I hated asking for help. It made me feel like I was confirming what my parents always believed, that I was a burden, that I couldn't make it alone. But Jade was right. Pride didn't pay bills. The next morning, I scheduled another meeting with Ms. Benton. I showed her everything, my grades, my work schedule, the hours I'd lost. I even brought documentation of my side business. She leaned back in her chair, impressed. "You've built all this while carrying a full course load?" I nodded. "And I'm still standing." She smiled. "Barely, I imagine." Then she opened a folder. "Your academic record makes you eligible for a departmental research grant, and Professor Bennett submitted a strong recommendation on your behalf. It's competitive, but I think we can expedite it." I nearly exhaled for the first time in days. By the end of that week, the grant was approved. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to keep me afloat, enough to buy me time. Even better, Professor Bennett offered to increase my research assistant hours. "You've already proven your value," she said, handing me a new assignment. "And frankly, I'd rather pay someone hungry and capable than babysit someone who's entitled and lazy." For the first time in a while, I smiled without forcing it. Meanwhile, Nimble Desk kept growing. I took on 2 new clients, a local gym struggling to keep up with social media, and a candle maker who needed help managing her Etsy orders. I built their newsletters, cleaned up their online presence, and scheduled their posts a week in advance. It was chaotic, and it was exhilarating. Each new client meant more revenue, more confidence, more belief that I was doing something real. But the balance was still fragile. One Tuesday night, I came home to find Jade pacing the kitchen, phone in hand. She looked up and whispered, "Don't freak out." "Okay." The landlord came by, said the water bill's overdue. Danny and Amber were supposed to pay it last month, but forgot. Now we're all on the hook. "How much?" $180, due Friday." I felt my stomach drop. That was my grocery and gas budget for 2 weeks. Without a word, I turned on my laptop, opened Nimble Desk, and reached out to 3 previous clients. I offered a limited-time holiday package, 10 hours of service for a discounted flat fee, first come, first serve. I sent the email at 10:22 p.m. By 10:58, 2 replied yes. I spent the next 72 hours glued to my screen, writing captions, building templates, answering questions, and formatting newsletters in Canva until my eyes blurred. I slept 4 hours total over 3 nights. Friday afternoon, I handed Jade $90 in cash. She didn't say anything, just hugged me hard. "You shouldn't have to do all this alone," she whispered. But here's the thing, I wasn't alone anymore. In class that week, Professor Bennett used one of my client campaigns as a real-world case study. In front of 200 students, she said, "This is what resourcefulness looks like. This is what a problem solver builds when they have no room to fail." And I wasn't embarrassed. I was proud. Even Savannah started texting more. Not just for help, but to talk, to check in. She even asked about my business. "I think what you're doing is really impressive," she wrote one night. "I don't think I could ever handle what you're handling." I didn't need her to say it, but I appreciated that she did, because deep down I was learning something important. Success isn't about who gets the smoothest ride. It's about who learns to drive in the rain, with bald tires, no GPS, and a map they had to draw themselves. And I was still driving, still going, still building, even when no one had paved the road for me. The email came in just after midnight, buried between a receipt for my internet bill and a reminder from the financial aid office. The subject line was simple: National Collegiate Startup Challenge, invitation to apply. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But the sender was legitimate. It had been forwarded by Professor Bennett. Her note read, "This is your moment. Apply." I stared at the screen for a solid minute. I had heard of the challenge before, a national-level competition that awarded funding and mentorship to student entrepreneurs. It was rarefied air, big names, top-tier schools, polished teams with seed capital and branding budgets. I was a solo act with a Canva account and a barely functional laptop. But I had something else. I had a product that worked, a service people paid for, and grit. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I started the application. They wanted a business summary, a problem statement, customer data, projected growth. I had all of it, because I had lived every piece of it. I pulled screenshots from my active client dashboards, uploaded testimonials from real business owners, and wrapped it all in the clearest language I could manage through trembling fingers. By sunrise, I hit submit. The next 2 weeks crawled. I kept my head down, attended classes, fulfilled Nimble Desk contracts, updated Professor Bennett on the research project. Meanwhile, Jade was dealing with her own mess, a failing grade in organic chemistry. I helped her build a study guide, and we formed a ritual. Silent study from 9 to 11 p.m., then cheap microwave popcorn and 30 minutes of bad reality TV. It was the most structure either of us had in our personal lives. Then Savannah showed up, not metaphorically. She literally knocked on my apartment door, unannounced, at 10:45 on a Thursday night. When I opened it, I didn't recognize her at first. She wasn't glowing with her usual campus queen energy. Her eyes were puffy. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked shaky. "Hey," she said, voice soft. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly. Jade was already in her room, headphones on, so I led Savannah to the kitchen table and offered her the chipped mug I always used when I needed to think. She clutched it like a lifeline, even though it was empty. "What's wrong?" She took a breath. "I'm failing my senior thesis." I blinked. "You're a freshman." "I skipped a grade, remember?" "I'm in the senior seminar." "It's bad, Maya. My advisor said my methodology is fundamentally flawed. I have 3 weeks to fix it or I won't graduate on time." I didn't say anything. The silence stretched, but I didn't rescue her from it. "I know I've been oblivious," she said finally. "I didn't understand how hard things have been for you. I didn't want to understand. It was easier to pretend everything was fine." She looked down. But it's not. I'm sinking. And I need help. Real help. From someone who knows how to dig their way out of impossible things. I should have said no. I should have told her to go cry to Mum and Dad, the ones who paid for her dorm, her classes, her weekly care packages. But I didn't. Because as much as I had resented her for years, I didn't hate her. I pitied her. Because for the first time she was facing something without a net, and she didn't know how to fall. I opened my laptop. Let me see what you've got. That night was the first of many. I tore through her draft, marked up every section with notes, broke down her argument structure, and taught her how to actually research instead of just quote articles she barely read. At first she resisted, then she listened, and then she worked. Our relationship began to shift in those late-night hours. We argued about formatting. We laughed over a typo that changed civic duty to chicken duty. She told me she'd been questioning whether she even wanted to go into politics anymore. I told her I never stopped questioning what I wanted, because I'd never had the luxury to decide based on anything but necessity. One night, as we took a break from editing, she said, "You know, if our parents had given you even half of what they gave me, you'd already be unstoppable." I shook my head. Number, if they'd given me everything, I might have grown up like you. She looked at me, unblinking. That's fair. A week later, my phone rang while I was restocking shelves at the bookstore. I stepped into the alley behind the building to answer. It was the Startup Challenge Committee. "Congratulations, Maya," the woman said. "You've been selected as a finalist. Your presentation is in 3 weeks. You'll be competing for $50,000 in funding." For a moment I couldn't breathe, not from panic, from validation. I called Professor Bennett immediately. She was already smiling through the phone. I had a feeling, you've got something real. That night I told Jade first. She screamed, jumped off the couch, and demanded we celebrate with gas station cupcakes. Then I told Savannah. She just stared at me for a long second, then said, "Maya, that's huge. You're going to change everything, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. But I knew one thing for sure. Everything was already starting to shift. The girl who once packed her life in duffel bags and drove toward an uncertain future was now standing on the edge of something enormous. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the edge. I was ready to leap. The finalist orientation for the Startup Challenge was held over Zoom the following Monday, and I logged in from Jade's room because her desk had better lighting. I wore my only clean blazer, navy, slightly too big on the shoulders, and pulled my curls back in a bun so I'd look composed, even if my stomach was in knots. There were 20 of us on the call, and I quickly noticed something. Almost everyone else came from elite schools: Stanford, NYU, MIT. They had team members, polished slide decks, business mentors in the background. Me? I was sitting cross-legged on a borrowed chair with my prototype built in Google Sheets. But when it was my turn to speak, I didn't flinch. I introduced Nimble Desk. I explained what it did, who it served, and why it mattered. I didn't use buzzwords or jargon. I used stories about the bakery that didn't have time to answer customer emails, the florist who couldn't afford a website but needed one to survive, real people, real problems, real solutions. After the meeting, I got a message from one of the organizers. "Your pitch stood out for its clarity and authenticity. Looking forward to your presentation." That night, I worked till 3 a.m., polishing my deck. Every slide mattered, every word. Jade helped me refine the design. Savannah even offered to listen to a dry run. I raised an eyebrow but said yes. She took it seriously, even offered solid feedback. "You're great when you speak like this," she said. "You're not trying to sound smart. You already are." 3 weeks passed in a blur. Between classes, my research job, and preparing for the presentation, I barely had time to think. But something strange started happening. People began noticing me. Professors stopped me in hallways. Students in the business school whispered my name. Nimble Desk had become more than a project. It was becoming a presence. Then I got a second email that changed everything. "Dear Maya Carter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as the student speaker for this year's commencement ceremony." I had to read it 3 times. Apparently, Professor Bennett had nominated me without telling me. In her letter, she described me as the student who redefined resilience. The committee chose me over dozens of high GPA seniors. They wanted someone with a story. I sat on the floor, phone still in my hand, and stared at the wall for a long time. When I told Savannah, she looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You're going to stand on that stage," she whispered. "And Mom and Dad, they'll have no idea what's coming." The morning of graduation was overcast, but the energy on campus was electric. Caps and gowns rustled in the wind, camera shutters clicked, families laughed and posed in front of every flowerbed and statue. I walked through it all like I was in a dream. My name wasn't on the big banners, it wasn't on posters, but in every corner of that stadium, someone had heard of Nimble Desk. A few students even came up to me before the ceremony and said, "You're the girl with the startup, right?" Like I was someone. In my row, Savannah sat just a few seats away. Our parents were already seated in the audience, front row center, still clueless. They had come expecting to celebrate Savannah. She was still their star, still the one they poured everything into. They had no idea I'd be the one holding the microphone. When the dean introduced me, student entrepreneur, academic achiever, and resilient leader, I stepped up to the podium, my heart beating in my ears. I paused for a second, looked out over the crowd. My eyes landed on Mom's stunned face, Dad's frozen expression, and Savannah's quiet, steady gaze. Then I began. I wasn't the expected one, I said. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, not the favorite. I was the one people assumed would be fine without help. The one told to figure it out. So I did. I talked about the invisible students, the ones who worked shifts before class, who paid tuition with tips and lived off ramen and resourcefulness. I spoke about the power of building something from scratch, about dignity, about grit. I didn't say their names, I didn't have to. Every word cut like truth, and it landed exactly where I wanted. I ended with, "I used to think I had to wait for someone to believe in me. But belief isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, brick by brick, hour by hour. And when no one gives you a seat at the table, you don't just sit on the floor. You build your own table." When I stepped away, the stadium erupted in applause. I caught a glimpse of my parents. My mother's hand was covering her mouth. My father sat rigid, eyes glassy. Their faces had gone pale, and in that moment I felt peace. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes when the weight you've been carrying finally lets go. After the ceremony, people swarmed me, classmates, faculty, even strangers. I took photos, accepted congratulations. For once, I wasn't in Savannah's shadow. She was standing beside me, smiling, not with envy, but with pride. Our parents eventually approached. Dad cleared his throat. That was quite a speech. Mum nodded, eyes still glossy. We didn't realize. I met their gaze, steady. I know. And that was enough, because I didn't need their apology. I had already built everything they thought I couldn't. The Startup Challenge finals were held in Atlanta, inside a sleek, glass-walled convention center that felt like the beating heart of a future I never imagined I'd touch. When I walked through the revolving doors that morning, carrying my beat-up laptop and a zip drive with my presentation slides, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. There were 5 finalists. 4 of them had custom-tailored suits, embossed business cards, and slick video intros that looked like they were made by professional ad agencies. I had none of that. But what I had was real. Paying clients, documented results, and a business born from desperation that had turned into purpose. The judges weren't just professors. They were CEOs, venture capitalists, and former startup founders. I recognized one of them from a Forbes cover. Another had sold her company to Google last year. I was scheduled to present third. Backstage, I paced in a corner, going over my notes one last time. Professor Bennett, who had flown down for the event, stood nearby with her arms crossed and that subtle, confident smile she reserved for moments she knew were about to shift history. "You nervous?" she asked. I shook my head. "Terrified." "Good. Means you care." Then I heard my name. I stepped onto the stage, lights warm on my face, the room packed with professionals and peers. A massive screen behind me lit up with the Nimble Desk logo. Simple, blue, clean. I took a breath, looked straight ahead, and began. I'm Maya Carter, founder of NimbleDesk, a digital support service for small businesses run by people who don't have time to Google what SEO means. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. I told them about Mrs. Alvarez, the bakery owner who used to spend 6 hours a week replying to messages she didn't know how to filter. About Calvin, the gym manager who couldn't keep up with appointment reminders until we automated them. I showed numbers, real ones, growth, retention, savings. I ended with a quote from a client email. You made it possible for me to breathe again. The room was quiet when I finished. Then came the applause. Later, when the judges asked questions, I answered without flinching. One asked, "How do you scale a business like this without burning out?" I smiled. By building systems that are smarter than I am, and by hiring people who've had to fight as hard as I have. Another judge leaned forward. Where do you see NimbleDesk in 5 years? Hiring first-generation college students, training them to run accounts, building tools for people who've never been handed instruction manuals. I don't want to just grow. I want to replicate resilience. That got a nod, maybe even a raised eyebrow of respect. When I stepped off stage, Professor Bennett clapped once, slow and proud. You just shifted the room, she said. The rest of the event passed in a blur. I watched the final 2 presentations, both impressive, both polished. But I wasn't comparing anymore. I had done what I came to do. Savannah texted me during the judges' deliberation. Savannah, I watched the live stream. You crushed it. Me. Thanks. Savannah, Mom and Dad are watching too. They don't know how to process what's happening. Me. They don't have to. I didn't build this for them. She sent back a heart emoji. Just one. But I knew what it meant. Then came the moment. The judges returned to the stage. The moderator smiled, holding a sealed envelope like it contained the fate of nations. This year's winner of the National Collegiate Startup Challenge and the recipient of a $50,000 development grant is Maya Carter, founder of NimbleDesk. I heard the words, I felt them, but I didn't move until I saw Professor Bennett's head tilt, a subtle nod like, yes, this is yours. I walked back onto the stage. They handed me a plaque, posed for photos, asked me to say a few words. I took the mic, hands only slightly trembling now. I built NimbleDesk in a studio apartment with bad plumbing and borrowed Wi-Fi. I didn't have a business background or a trust fund. What I had was student debt, exhaustion, and a fire I couldn't put out. And I know I'm not the only one. So this win, it's not just for me. It's for the students answering emails between shifts, for the single parents trying to build something while the world tells them to settle. We deserve to dream too. Standing ovation. After the ceremony, I was mobbed with congratulations. 2 judges gave me their cards. A local entrepreneur asked if I'd consider a partnership. Professor Bennett squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "You've arrived." Back at the hotel, I lay on the bed, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. I had won, and yet, the victory wasn't the money. It was what the money represented. It meant I'd never again have to beg for space at someone else's table. I had built my own. A week later, I returned to campus to wrap up finals and prepare for graduation. Savannah and I had dinner, just the 2 of us, for the first time in years. She'd changed, softer, more honest. She told me she'd turned down a summer internship in DC to work with a local nonprofit focused on education reform. I want to earn it, she said, not just follow a path that was cleared for me. I believed her. At graduation, we walked side by side. Our parents were in the audience again, this time quieter, more careful with their glances. I didn't expect an apology. I didn't need one. I had outgrown needing to be understood by people who had only ever seen me through the lens of their own fears. But as we left the stadium, my father approached. "Maya," he said, voice rough, "your mother and I, we didn't get it, but we see it now." I nodded. That's enough. It was. Because legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you build from the ground up. And I had built mine. 1 year later, I stood in a quiet office space that smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. The walls were white, the furniture was secondhand, and the floor creaked in one corner near the window. But it was mine. NimbleDesk HQ, all 700 square feet of it, was open for business in the heart of downtown Charlotte. I hired 3 people in the first quarter, all first-generation college students, all sharp, hungry, and brimming with ideas. I trained them myself, passed on everything I'd learned: how to communicate with overwhelmed clients, how to automate simple tasks, how to listen for the problem under the problem. We didn't just sell services. We gave breathing room to people who had spent their entire lives running on empty. We didn't have nap pods or free lattes. We had grit, laughter, and a shared playlist we took turns updating every week. And that was more than enough. Jade became my first full-time hire. After graduation, she moved into the apartment upstairs and started building out our design services. She never let me forget the ramen nights and the water bills. I never let her forget that she'd been my first real anchor. Savannah and I still talked, more often now, and not just about the past. She had taken a fellowship at a grassroots education nonprofit, working directly with schools to address systemic funding gaps. For the first time in her life, she was hearing stories from kids like me. She once told me, "It's humbling to realize how much I didn't know." I believed her. Our parents had changed too, but slowly and on their own terms. After my graduation speech went viral, yes, it was clipped and shared by a motivational Instagram page, Dad sent me an email. Just a few lines. "I underestimated you. I regret it. But I'm proud now." It wasn't much, but it was something. Mom mailed me a handwritten note. Inside was the same kind of floral stationery she used when writing to her own mother. It said, "You taught me what strength really looks like. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." I didn't reply right away. I wasn't ready, but I kept the note in my desk drawer. For now, that was enough. A few months after the office opened, I launched the Ruby Resilience Fund, a micro-grant program named after my grandmother. Each semester, we awarded 3 $1,000 scholarships to students building something from scratch. No essays, no GPA minimum. Just a story, a dream, and proof they'd already taken the first step. At the first award dinner, I wore Grandma Ruby's necklace and spoke about how belief often blooms in the most unlikely soil. I looked out into the crowd and saw my old high school counselor wiping her eyes, a former Nimble Desk client beaming, and Jade standing at the back holding up her phone to record the moment. And I saw my parents, sitting quietly near the edge of the room. This time they didn't interrupt. They didn't ask to take credit. They simply clapped and stayed. After the event, Savannah caught me outside. "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "A book?" "Yeah, your story. People need to hear it." I shook my head, smiling. "Maybe one day, when I've figured out how to end it," she grinned. "I think you already did." Later that night, alone in the office, I walked to the window and looked out over the city. The streets below were glowing with traffic. People chasing dreams, heading home, heading forward. I thought about the girl I used to be, standing in the shadow of her sister, scraping together tuition, too tired to dream, but too stubborn to quit. And now, I wasn't just surviving, I was leading. No longer begging for belief, no longer seeking permission to succeed. I didn't become the favorite, I became the foundation. And sometimes that's even better. Because legacy isn't measured by applause or approval. It's measured by what you leave behind for someone else to stand on. And I had built something worth standing on. Brick by brick, client by client, choice by choice. A legacy, not for the ones who doubted me, but for those who come after. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.